Hello everyone, welcome back to our video updates. It's Shade here. Today's video is going to be for those questions we receive from people working on excess proceeds or surplus funds claims, trying to find the right claimant whenever the excess funds belong to a nonprofit. So in this case, we will go over the scenario when the nonprofit is a church, but there are of course different types of nonprofits and the same rules would apply. And of course, sometimes each state has slightly different laws. So this particular video is for educational purposes as always, and it's based on Texas state laws. Generally speaking, the nonprofit laws are very, very similar, but check with a lawyer in your state to get the final say on this type of question. The first question that I'm going to address is the question of who would be the right claimant if I find out that it appears that the excess proceeds belongs to a church or another type of nonprofit. Well, when it's a nonprofit, the main distinction between a nonprofit and a for-profit is that nonprofits assets are not owned by the individual members or people that are part of that nonprofit. So the nonprofit's assets are owned for the purpose of the nonprofit, for the purpose for which that nonprofit was established. So in a sense, nobody owns the excess proceeds from the nonprofit, but the nonprofit itself. And if the nonprofit is still in existence, then of course you can still claim those excess proceeds and the nonprofit can use those funds to continue to work on whatever the purpose of the nonprofit was in the first place. In the case of a church, that means that the church can still go ahead and claim the excess proceeds after an involuntary sale of that asset, which is the land or property. And of course, a foreclosure is an involuntary sale. So the nonprofit can still claim it, but who exactly should you be speaking to as an asset locator? Who is the party or agent that might be authorized to speak for the nonprofit? So that's the question that we would usually get. The best way to figure out who the right parties are is of course to call to the church if you want to and ask who are the directors of your church. You can ask somebody there and they will usually tell you who the directors are if the church is organized formally. A lot of nonprofits are not formally organized. Some churches are very small and so they're run by family members and nobody really bothered to file anything with the state or with IRS for nonprofit status or anything like that. So they could still exist as an informally organized association under a lot of state laws. You can still organize a nonprofit without really filing any documents with that state or with the federal government. So that's when things get a little bit confusing because people will then tell you they don't know or they don't have a director. And then the next question, if they're not able to tell you who the directors are, you can ask them who manages the church, who is in charge, and they should be able to tell you that. You can start there and then ask that person that's in charge whether they filed documents with the state whenever the church was established or whenever the nonprofit was established. Most of them will be able to tell you. If they don't know, then you will have to go one step further and try to find out from the state whether that church or organization was set up formally. The only way that you can do that is by talking to the Secretary of State in that state where the where the nonprofit exists and figuring out whether they filed some documents to show that they organized a nonprofit. If you're not able to figure that out, a lawyer will be able to do that for you, okay? And it's just as simple as going to your Google search and typing in, the state of Texas entity search. And that should help you to start. You can type in Texas state entity search or Texas comptroller entity search, and it would show you a space where you can try to find the entity that way. If you are not successful, you can go to the Secretary of State's website and follow their instructions on how you can do a search for an entity, okay? And that would show you whether the entity was ever in existence and whether it's still in existence. The way that the excess proceeds are treated, the excess proceeds claims are treated is different if the nonprofit is no longer in existence. So that's why that's important to know. If they're still in existence but forfeited their abandoned their filings with the state, then that's okay, because they can still continue usually to operate informally as a nonprofit, and there's no law against that. In most states, they can do that informally, sort of like an association would do, without having any formal documents filed with the state. So when they're in existence, yes, you can get one of the directors to be the authorized agent to claim the funds that are either with the county or with the lender, if it was a situation where there was a mortgage on that property. In the case where they have filed documents with the state, sometimes you'll be able to find their most recent filing showing who their directors and officers are. And so all you have to do is to make sure that the person you're speaking with appears on that list, either as a director or an officer. But it depends on how they designate their duties and responsibilities. So it doesn't mean that just because somebody's an officer that they're not authorized. So make sure to ask them if they're authorized to sign legal documents on behalf of the church or on behalf of the nonprofit. And most people are not going to lie about that. If you're uncertain, you would let the attorney know once you send over the file to an attorney to process the claim that you're not 100% sure that you have the right authorized agent, and the lawyer of course will still do due diligence on their part. But just so that you are not wasting a lot of time trying to find the right party, I wanted to do this video to explain to you that it has to be a director or an officer of the church. If they're informally organized, they're not going to have people that are called directors or officers, but they'll at least have somebody who manages the affairs of the church. So you would ask the same question and say, who is the party that typically signs your legal documents, and who signs for the big purchases that you make? Because that same person will be the authorized agent most likely. Okay, so those are the types of people that you want to go after when it's a nonprofit. And a lot of the times the director can serve also in the role of an officer. So don't let that matter in any way. The second part of the question, we have to address the nonprofits that are no longer in existence with the state, as far as they filed in the past and they're no longer filing their documents that they're supposed to file, the reports that they're supposed to file with the state. But not only that, but they're also no longer in existence in real life at all. So let's say we organized a church in the year 2000, and after about 10 years, everything just died down and we abandoned the church completely. And now there was some property there that the government finally sold at foreclosure auction, and there's some money left over from the sale after paying off all the liens that were owed. Well, the funds do technically belong to the nonprofit, but that nonprofit is no longer in existence on paper, but it's also no longer in existence at all, just is no longer there. So you will then still be able to claim those funds for the nonprofit, but because the nonprofit is no longer in existence, a lot of the states do not release the money to that nonprofit unless the nonprofit is reestablished, or unless the nonprofit can show that the funds are going to a similar nonprofit that is established for a purpose that's very close to what the original purpose of that old nonprofit was. So let's say the nonprofit was a Boys and Girls Club that was helping young adults to choose career paths, and then it's no longer there. You will then have to track down the directors for the old Boys and Girls Club, right? And you'll get that director to agree to allow you to help them claim the excess proceeds, or to allow you to find a lawyer to help them claim the excess proceeds. However, because they're no longer in existence on paper or anywhere at all, there is no incentive for this director to allow you to do that, because they're going to get $0 from the whole deal, because they have to turn all that money over to another nonprofit. Now, I think that's still good enough incentive, because it's better than the county getting the money or the state getting the funds. I would rather let it go to another nonprofit. But a lot of people, I don't think, would like to help you to go through all these steps where they get nothing and there's no longer a nonprofit that they are interested in. And most people just tend to not want to be involved to that level because the funds are not really coming to them or to their nonprofit. And I think that's kind of sad, but that's just the way human nature is. They don't want to be bothered, even though they're not really doing a lot other than just signing an agreement. They would probably not be very easy to work with. So my suggestion is, if you get to the point where you're hitting a brick wall, where you see that the nonprofit is no longer in existence with the state, but the people that were part of the nonprofit in the past have told you that it's actually no longer in existence at all, I think you have to walk away from that kind of claim. So that's my suggestion for you. This is the video that I wanted to put out today. I hope that it's not confusing, because there are layers of complexity to the nonprofit, but I wanted you to be confident when you're going out talking to people, and also to know the right questions to ask. Just to recap, the main questions to ask would be, are you one of the directors and officers of the nonprofit? And if they say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, then you ask them, who is? And could you give me their contact information? And if they still don't know, then you ask them, who is the one managing this church, or who is the one managing this nonprofit? And they will be able to tell you that, who is in charge. And then once you get to that level and start talking to the person who is in charge, you'll ask them if their organization has filed documents with the state where you can get those documents. And then they'll tell you yes or no. And then you go and do your little due diligence to see whether the names listed with the state as the directors and officers matches any of the people that you're speaking with. If they truly were organized and filed documents with the state, and you notice that the state shows that they're no longer in existence, you'd want to ask that person that's in charge, that is the nonprofit still ongoing as of today? And if they tell you yes, then you know that you can confidently move forward. If they tell you no, then that would give you pause. But go ahead and talk to the lawyer that will be helping you with the claims, to see if the lawyer believes that in that state that you could still collect the funds for the nonprofit that's no longer in existence. So those are the things to keep in mind. Remember, it's still going to be work, but it's going to be worth it. So this is a good area to work in as far as helping people and organizations to claim the excess funds from the government and from the lenders, so that it doesn't go to the wrong hands. But it's still going to take a little bit of work on your part and a little bit of due diligence. But I know that the lawyers that you'll be working with would also do another layer of due diligence. But this is just to save you some time, so that you're not talking to the wrong people in the organization. So that's my overview for you. This is specifically for the nonprofits. I'll do another video for you shortly that will tell you how to navigate things when the claimant is a for-profit organization. And of course, the place where you find that information is usually on your list that you're looking at, or maybe on the county's website that you're looking at, to see who is listed as the defendant. And you'll see really clearly that it's a church, or it's some other nonprofit, or it's a for-profit organization. So hopefully this video has been helpful to you, and I look forward to making you more videos and making sure that you're successful in this line of work. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.